Welcome back. Welcome back to week 2 of the Cardigan effect, cultivating kindness and community. In our first week, we looked at first, listen. And in that, we looked at the fact that we should listen for understanding, not to argue, not to critique, not to respond, but listen for understanding. And when we do, we can create neighbors with pretty much anyone. This week we're moving into empathy. And so as we think about empathy, we move back to the story of the Good Samaritan. There's an individual lying in the middle of the road, half dead, and 2 individuals go by him, don't stop. The Levite and the priest. But then there's the Samaritan, the least likely person that a Jewish person would have thought would have stopped. A Samaritan stops, takes care of the individual. And in the story it says this: Jesus asks the lawyer, who was neighbor to this man? And his answer, the one who showed him compassion. Compassion, come meaning with, passion meaning feeling with. The Samaritan showed him empathy. Compassion and empathy could be siblings, very similar words. But sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes I get sympathy and empathy mixed up. And so now we're going to take a short video from Brene Brown about the differences between empathy and sympathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Wow. Did you love that clip? Brene Brown is amazing. I guess that's why she's a 6-time New York Times best-selling author. But did you catch some of the things that she said there? She said empathy. Empathy is feeling with. And sympathy is feeling for. Sympathy, I can say, I'm sorry for your loss. Where empathy reaches inside yourself to feel the feeling that the other person is feeling, which is much harder. Brene also talks about that empathy is a vulnerable choice. I don't know about you, but vulnerability isn't something that I love to do. It isn't something I wake in the morning and think, yay, I get to be super vulnerable today. And yet, that's a critical part of empathy. Now, when I think about vulnerability, I think about Mr. Rogers, an individual who did model vulnerability and compassion and empathy and deep care for others. And so we're going to take a watch of a clip by Mr. Rogers on empathy and him being vulnerable.
So many people have asked me, do you ever get mad? And of course I answer, well, yes, everyone gets mad sometimes. The important thing is what we do with the mad that we feel in life. A few weeks ago, on my way home from a particularly tough day at work, I stopped to see my two grandsons. Their mom and dad weren't there, but the boys were there with the babysitter in the backyard, squirting water with hoses. I could see that they were really having fun, but I felt I needed to let them know that I didn't want to be squirted. So I told them so. And little by little, I could feel that the older boy, Alexander, was testing the limit, until finally his hose was squirting very close to where I was standing. I said to him in my harshest voice, "Okay, that's it, Alexander. Turn off the water. You've had it." He did as I told him, said he was sorry, and looked very sad. The more I thought about it, the sadder I got. I realized that Alexander had not squirted me, and that I had stepped into his and his brother's play with a lot of feelings left over from work. So when I got home, I just called Alexander on the phone. I told him I felt awful about my visit with him. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was taking out my anger from work on him. I told him I was really sorry. Do you know how he answered me? He said, "Oh, Bubba," he calls me Bubba. "Oh, Bubba, everybody makes mistakes sometimes." I nearly cried. I was so touched by his naturally generous heart. And I realized that if I hadn't called him, I might not have ever received that wonderful gift of Alexander's sweet forgiveness.
Wow, what a great clip from Mr. Rogers. Now, when I think about empathy and I think about vulnerability, I think about Jesus. And I think about the story of Jesus when he's headed to the house of Mary and Martha. He's just learned that his good friend Lazarus has died. And he arrives at their house and everyone there is weeping. They're crying. They are heartbroken. And we're told in John chapter 11 that Jesus, deeply moved in the spirit, or groans and begins to weep. Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, and yet one that is so very powerful. He didn't stand at a distance and say, "Mary, Martha, I'm sorry for the loss of Lazarus." Instead, he was vulnerable and he went to a place where he felt with them and he wept with them. And that's the power. That's the power of empathy. It allows us to connect with another person in a very vulnerable, in a very unique, in a very powerful way. And so if we are going to create the type of communities that Mr. Rogers and Jesus created, neighborhoods, empathy. Empathy is an essential ingredient. We now invite you to take some time with your small groups and discuss this further.